There was no master plan here. It was just, George referred to it as like a farm with buildings scattered for different purposes. He wanted no monolithic building for the shop, so you'd have to go outside when you were going between buildings. And definitely connected with the land. He said, our spirit is here and mingles with the spirits that's already here. So, in that sense, we're imposing, in a way, on what was here. But we're open to the land teaching us and being part of the dialogue that is established with us being here. Because that's George's way of working. That, rather than imposing yourself on your environment or in making things, imposing yourself on the wood, it's more standing back and letting what's there, the spirit of what's there, influence you, so that it's more of a dialogue and an opening.
This is the original workshop, which my father built. It was the first building on the property. We have built over it a couple of times because it got too small, but in the original version, it was the shop where Dad did all the work. It was the finishing room where he oiled it. It was also the office where he had all of his papers and telephone and whatever files he had. And then as time went on, they built more buildings, but this was the center of Nakashima's when it was first founded. So if we go over here to the right, there is the finishing room, which was originally built as a lumber storage. The taller part of the building is just a simple block building because we thought we were just going to put wood in there. And then we built the shed off to the side, and then it was taken over as a finishing room. The addition off to the left was added fairly recently because we're getting bigger and bigger tables and needed a little more space. This is our pole barn, which is the only building on the property which was not designed by and built by George Nakashima. We built it for his lumber collection when he passed away in 1990. My daughter and her father, who are both architects, helped me design and build it and get it permitted. And it's now the biggest building on the property and has the most wood in it. Do you want to come inside to look at the wood? There's not much light in here now, though. This is kind of not good. So we had originally thought that we would just plant poles in the ground and put a roof over it like the farmers used to do. And then Jerry, our head man in the shop, said it'd be really nice to be able to use a forklift. Here's the forklift. And so our builder said you have to have a concrete slab and you have to have steel beams. So we still call it the pole barn, but it's not really a pole barn. It's our largest lumber storage where everything has been kiln dried. It's stored in boule form. Each of the logs have been reconstructed from their scrambled state. so that all the logs, all the planks from one log are in one place. And it helps us to select for jobs when we know that all the planks from one log are in one place here. So it's mostly black walnut from Pennsylvania, but there are, in this particular pile, there are some large logs from California. It's California walnut. And further down there, there's some imported logs from England, not quite as nice as the ones that Dad had, but they are English oak burl when we could still get them. The lumber pile is actually our source of inspiration. And as I say, it's a motivation to keep working. The dogwood are getting ready to bloom. I don't know if they'll bloom next week or not, but they might. So here you can see the base of the arch, which goes down into the ground. There's actually a big tie beam underground holding this end of the studio together. And the weight of the studio is suspended on this arch and the heavy back wall on the north. So all of these walls in between are curtain walls. And I love the way that they are arranged, with the interior structure showing to the exterior, and just the way the windows and the doors and the walls are composed there. I think it's very beautiful. Reminds me of a Mondrian. So here we are at the northern end of the Conoid Studio. As you can see, has these big sine curves on the roof. The engineers added those after my father's request to make a conoid shell that would be 2.5 inches thick consistently from one side to the other because he didn't think a really, really thick roof is a shell. The Japanese maple tree to the left of the bridge was planted by my grandfather back in 1959 or so when the building was finished. And it was a tiny little tree, and it just keeps on growing and growing. We have to keep trimming it back, and it's still a beautiful tree, but it's showing its age. The arched bridge in front of the tree was designed and built by my father, along with the catch basins there to the left. On the patio here, you can see both the end of the arch and the cherry blossoms behind, but in the foreground is a Bertoia sculpture, which was given to my father by Harry Bertoia around 1959. What a gorgeous day. I'm so glad you came today. Yeah. So now we are inside the Conoid Studio, and we remove our shoes before going into here to preserve the floors. The floors are graduated wood. It starts over on that side with sappy cherry wood, and then goes to dark cherry, and then to sappy walnut, and is graduated down here to the whitest, darkest planks with a few little strips of rosewood intermingled. This is an old Migran 2 end table, which is made of English oak burl during my father's time. There is a lamp to the left. I made this at the invitation of Wendy Maruyama, who's another woodworker friend who was exhibiting at Penland in North Carolina. She was doing a series of furniture sculpture to commemorate the incarceration which we endured, us Japanese Americans were put into desert places in 1942 until 1945 during World War II. And during that period of time, my father collected, along with a lot of the other people who were incarcerated with us, would collect what's called bitter brush. It was a brush that grew on the Idaho desert, and they would cut it and clean it and shape it and make it into different objects, partly just to keep their sanity, but also so that they would have something beautiful to live with. So my father brought as much as he could back with him to the East Coast when we were released from camp. And this is one of the few precious pieces that's left. Also in this corner, there are a number of burls and cutoffs from uh, different projects that we've done that we use for lamp bases and for just odd orders of different things. This is a platform, and we have recently done a reproduction of the Whittaker Mueller sofa that my father had designed in the 1960s. And Whittaker Mueller is no longer in business, and well, I found a whole file of drawings from Whitcomb, so we reproduced these sofas. They're very labor intensive and very heavy, but we've been selling quite a bit of those. We can custom make them to different sizes. The two chairs on both sides are variations of the Conoid chair. I call it the Conoid host chair. It's a little bit taller, a little bit wider, and has arms, which is different from the traditional Conoid chair, which is completely cantilevered. This is one of the original Conoid tables, dining table, that from my father's time. It's English walnut, very beautiful English walnut, which is from that parcel of logs that my father went to England to purchase in the 1960s. And he was just thrilled when he milled it and was able to use some of this lumber for furniture. And a lot of the pieces in the studio, he used that special English walnut. So this is the Conoid dining table. Over here, we have a Conoid coffee table and a Conoid end table here, which he sort of tongue-in-cheek called the Conoid cross-legged end table, along with some rockers and the traditional Conoid chair, traditional Conoid lounge chair, and there's a new seating design which I made, I think about 6 years ago, for sectional seating. It can be proportioned to different sizes. This is proportioned to my size, and it uses 22.5-inch degrees, which I was interested in at the time because it's the angle which is manifested when you fold cranes. The original stand that I did was in honor of Sadako, who was a little girl who was poisoned by the nuclear fallout in Hiroshima. And she had this dream that if she was able to fold 1,000 cranes that she would get better. Unfortunately, she couldn't fold that many cranes and she didn't survive. But her tradition goes on, and I wanted to honor that tradition with a 22.5-degree angle. On the wall over there, there is another Harry Bertoia sculpture, which was given by Harry to my father when the building was finished in 1959. This rug here was designed by my father in 1959 for Ed Fields, and unfortunately it was never put into production until about 10 years ago when Ed Fields sold to Taiping in China, and they decided to do a designer line of Nakashima rugs. So I found a file in the closet labeled rugs by my mother of a series of designs that he had done for Ed Fields that were never produced. So Ed Fields is now producing George Nakashima designed rugs, which are available commercially by order. It's, they call it bespoken, or is that what it's called? Bespoken, I think. You have to order them ahead of time, but they can be ordered in different colors and different sizes. This strange sculptural thing that looks like a fan is a gift that was given to my father from his associates in Japan. From 1964, my father had a very strong relationship with a company that was called Sakura Seisakusho in Shikoku, Japan. And they eventually built what they called a Nakashima Memorial Museum for my father. And this is one of the gifts that they gave him when he did one of his many shows over there. It was made entirely by hand at that point. They didn't have laser cutters like they do now. And each of those angles in that grill work is different. And they made it all by hand, and it fits perfectly. And it's one of the feats of Japanese carpentry. Our design department, which I haven't cleaned up. It's a working space, so it looks pretty messy right now. It used to be my father's desk here, which when he was photographed was always clear and you could see the wood. And I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of a number of projects, so they're all on top of it right now. And Jason Neal here is my assistant designer. And people ask also about this piece of wood, which is standing here, and there's another piece of wood standing over there. These are remnants of the last show that my father had at the American Craft Museum. And it is a huge root section of Clara walnut from California, which was used as a demonstration piece at the opening of that show. It was visible from the street side, which had glass walls, as well as from the inside. And the curator wanted to demonstrate what it looked like, what the raw wood looked like before it was made into furniture. And my father, I think, thought that once these pieces came back, that he would make them into tabletops. But he passed away just after these pieces all came back from the museum installation, and we decided just to keep them the way they were because that's how Dad designed them, and he made them for his last show. There's a portrait of my father in bronze there. It was done by Jonathan Shawn, who was the son of Ben Shawn, another of my father's dear artist friends. And he did that likeness of my father just before my father passed away in the spring of 1990. To the right of my father's portrait, there's a small face, which was done by Shinichi Nagami for a show in Japan. He did a whole series of those, and he passed away shortly after, so I put that up there to keep Dad company. In Japanese carpentry, you're supposed to be very mindful of the tree and the way the tree was growing when you use it in architecture. So if you're selecting wood for the south side of a building, you have to make sure that it came from the south side of a mountain to use it. And when you're using wood, you have that's standing up like this, you have to make sure that it's standing up the same way it was growing. We reversed this one on the other side so that the root end is actually standing up. But it makes a really interesting form. There's also another piece here, which is from Japan, a piece of Zelkova, which my father said was considered some of the finest wood in Japan. And this piece was given to my father as a gift by his associates in Japan for doing a show over there. And it was standing around by itself for years, and we were doing a show somewhere, and I thought it'd be nice to take it as part of the show, and so I built a base for it. These were kind of the beginning of what we call tsuitate, which are standing pieces. I did a whole show of tsuitate, and shortly after my father passed away, I think it was 1994 or 5 or something, because we needed to, tell people that we were still alive after my father died. And the curator of the show was a Zen Buddhist monk, and he said, well, my gallery is very small, but I would like to show as many tabletops as possible. Can you stand them up vertically instead of horizontally? And I said, okay. And then I was like my father. I thought people would choose them, and then they would bring them home, and we would make them into tabletops. The interesting thing is that most of them sold just as they were, as pieces of sculpture. So that we still make tsuitate. They're all different. People pick out their own wood, and we do whatever we need to do with them to make them stand up. This is beautiful, the way the light comes through here. So what we have in front of us is now the chair department. It was designed around 1956 as a mock-up for the larger Conoid Studio behind it. And it's round on one end and flat on the other. It's made of plywood, and it was an experiment to see what kind of form this conoid shell might be when it got bigger and was made out of concrete. These are conoid chair seats, and Matt is working on making some more Conoid chairs because that's his specialty. We make the chair parts up in the main shop, and then we assemble them here. Even though they're all black walnut, that black walnut as a species has many different colors and are not really manifested until they get oil on them. But there is, as Soetsu Yanagi said, there is a variety in sameness. I mean, these all look like they're the same chair seat, but each one of them is different because of the wood grain and the way they were put together and the trees they came from. And it's just remarkable that, you know, nature has so much variety. So you want to walk down this way? Oh, the cherry blossoms are still here. I love looking at the roof lines for these two sheds. They were the first roofs that were hyperbolic paraboloid shells built on the property in 1956. And it was kind of an experimental shape at that time, but I just love the way that they're put together with the windows and the concrete block walls. It was intended as lumber storage, but it's just, I think it's a beautiful series of shapes together. And they've held up really well. They were built in '56, they're just plywood, and they're still in perfect shape. So this was the shed that my father built, and in the old days, this was openable so that a lumber truck could go all the way in. And then we would take down the lumber off of the truck piece by piece and stand it on its end so we could see it again afterwards. So a lot of the boards already have lines on them with dimensions and people's names. When the wood is stored upright like this, you can see it better and write on it and photograph it, which is what we do a lot when we're selecting wood for different projects. It's kind of fun. It's like going to a petrified forest or something where everything is standing on end. Usually, as I said, we do things by photograph, but before things go into the workshop, we draw these up. We usually make scale drawings at 1/16 equals 1 inch, which is a device that my father, I don't know if he invented it, but he was one of the people to recognize if you have a tape measure and it's in feet and inches, if you use 1/16 to 1 inch, you can use the same measure on your paper as you do as on the board itself. And you don't have to switch scales. So it makes it pretty convenient for us once you learn the conversion. Oftentimes, I will come in here and basically do a portrait of the board in question before we put it into production. And I'm really grateful. We had a woman working with us for many, many years before Sumi came, who worked with us on Saturday afternoons in the showroom. And her husband was a painter. And they had a fire in their studio. And he knew that I had studied architecture. And he said that he needed someone, an architect, to draw him some plans. And would I please come and design him some plans in exchange for taking drawing lessons. So I was very grateful to have taken basically free drawing lessons with William A. Smith for a number of years, and he really taught me a lot, and I'm very grateful to him. His widow, Farrell, is still a very dear friend. He's getting along in years. She decided to retire finally at the age of 80, and she worked with us, I think, 35 years. So we're very happy to have long-term employees who become friends. These are obviously freehand drawings. So They're not completely accurate, but they give you an idea of what the table is going to look like when it's done. This is a very large piece of curly maple. It looks to me like it's going to have fiddleback figure. The fiddleback is a technical term by lumbermen, which results in this kind of shimmering pattern. It's a sort of an optical illusion. It looks like it's got wrinkles in it, but it's flat. And they say that when you make fiddles out of this kind of wood, they sound better because it's more dense. And that's why they call it fiddleback. That was pretty close. Dad said that he got so good he didn't really have to use his measure. He could tell just by eye, you know, what scale something was. And I haven't gotten that good yet, but I keep trying. This will probably get a couple of butterflies. So that's it. That's the way we start. We go from there, figure out the best way to support a big, heavy plank like this. When I first started with Dad, he had little 5x7 little note papers that he used to scribble on when he was giving a project to somebody in the shop. And I looked at him, I thought, well, of course he was in the shop every day, many more hours than I ever am. So whenever, you know, somebody came to a certain point in their project and said, okay, now what do I do, George? You know, George would tell him what to do. So he didn't have to put down a whole lot of details. And then when I came in the 70s, I said, well, how do they know what size to make things or where to put them? And he says, oh, they know how to do that. Well, I because I went to architectural school, decided that we needed a few more dimensions on the drawings. So we put those on the drawing board and work them out. I don't know if there's a mathematics to it, but what Bill Smith used to tell me, there's some kind of instinctive proportional thing that happens in an artist's eye that you just kind of know what's going to work and what is not going to work. But we do have files that we refer to. And we, you know, so there's a table this size that was done before. We look at what was done before and see if that works again. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But at least you have something to start from. And we have many, many different bases too. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. That's why we keep making new bases. And even though you may use the same design, it's proportioned according to the top. If it's a really thick, heavy top, the base has to be thick and heavy too. And if it's narrow, you make the base narrower, and if it's wider, you make the base wider. Although Dad said oftentimes with a wide and heavy base, it's so wide and heavy it can't go anywhere, so that you don't need that big a base on it. It's trial and error. Usually we're pretty good by now. And then, yeah, sometimes you get stuff like this, which is a real challenge. I haven't figured out what to do with this one yet, but it's a wych elm burl from Scotland, and it's near the outside of the tree, so it's got this funny contour, probably where the branches went off and then the root end went out, and then it's got this narrow waist in the middle. But nobody's wanted it for anything yet, but if somebody wants it, I'm going to have to really create something different to support it. We try to preserve as much as possible. Some of this may disappear, and this is bark in here, so we take a lot of time picking off the bark without destroying the contour. And then it's wire brushed, and then it's sanded, and Alyssa has decided to use Dremel bits of different sizes and shapes to clean out all the crud in between the burls. It's a lot quicker that way. I used to do it all by hand.
one of the imponderables of George's designs is that that balance between completely at rest, timeless, immobile, and dynamism, motion, activity. So that it's very subtle and imponderable, but they look like they're completely steady and at rest, but caught in motion, as if they're moving. It's like that tree. It's, when you look at it, it looks, it's just time. It's not a time factor. It's not it's motionless. So it's, but then you can see it's caught in motion. You can see it's moving.